At 7 o'clock, and it's time to have that conversation about the state of the nation on different matters based on a professional's perspective. And I want to begin by introducing the panelists that are in studio here. We have one Reginald Kadzutsu, who is the acting chief executive officer at Emana Capital. He's also a financial and economic analyst. He has an experience of 15 years in investment management. He also has a Bachelor of Science and a Master of Science in Finance, and he's also a PhD student on financial economics. Welcome to studio. Engineer Kariuki Mushemi, who is a practicing civil engineer with over 30 years of experience, a bachelor's and master's degree in engineering. He is an advocate of the High Court also with an LLB, and a member of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, but also member of the University of Nairobi Council. Thank you so much, Engineer.
Thank you, Sam.
Making time for us. And finally, I have the opportunity to correctly get your name. This is FCPA Erastus Kwaka Omolo, who is the managing partner at Crowe Erastus and Company. He's a certified public accountant. He's a fellow of ISPAC, that is the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Kenya. He is a member of many organizations, including ICPAR, that is in Rwanda, IIIA, Kenya Institute of Management, and Institute of Economic Affairs. He is also a graduate of Bachelor of Commerce in Accounting and also an MBA in Strategic Management. He has interests in audit, finance, and taxation. Welcome to studio. And Dr. Andrew Were, who we've spoken to on several occasions about COVID-19 matters, is the president of the Kenya Medical Association. He's been a medical doctor for over 12 years, and he's also a surgeon in plastics, reconstructive and aesthetic at the Kenyatta National Hospital, and he champions for doctors' welfare and better quality of healthcare services. So those are the panelists that we have here in studio, and we spent some time to discuss matters affecting the nation, and specifically on the economy, politics, and the road to 2022. What must Kenyans be looking at as they gauge their leadership? And I want us to begin by looking at the two dailies. On the front page of this Standard, you'll see pain as fuel prices hit an all-time high. You'll see the retail price of petrol increases to a historic high of 134 shillings 72 cents per litre in Nairobi, while diesel will go for 115.6 cents and kerosene at 110.81 cents after the government removed the subsidy that had cushioned Kenyans. Just to correct that, diesel will retail at 115 shillings 60 cents. And it's also a big story on the front page of the Daily Nation. Pain at the pump as fuel prices go up. The story continues on page 6 of the paper to detail the varying prices, including 147 in Garissa, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, the far you are from the port of Mombasa, the higher you pay for the fuel. And I want us to begin, or I wanted to begin with the economists, but let me begin with the auditor here, FCPA Omolo. When you look at what has happened to the country just yesterday, of course, the APRA says that over the past 3 months, they have tried to, as much as possible, cushion Kenyans, and that is why the prices have not been varying. But now, at a time that you have to pay for a litre of petrol, 134 shillings, 135 in some places, but all the way to over 140 shillings. What does this tell you based on what the country has been going through over the past few months?
It says many things, but one of the most unfortunate things it is saying is that we don't think of the common man. If you increase the price of paraffin, no matter what the excuse is, and the excuse is the subsidy has been removed and so on. Before the subsidy was removed, where was the money coming from that cushioned the public? It's a government thing, and it is a policy thing. So it is not as if some money will be looked for from heaven or from some other corner of the globe. It is a policy decision. And of course, increasing paraffin by 12 shillings is to say that the common man who uses paraffin pay more, and also it is to say, perhaps invertedly, that the common man will never protest. Therefore, just increase it, it doesn't matter. And that is extremely unfortunate, and I would like to end that comment there.
Okay, and Reginald, as you look at this, I don't know if you've had the opportunity to look at the reasons given by EPRA, of course, the cost of landing or the landing cost of crude oil, what has happened to the dollar depreciating against the shilling depreciating against the dollar. Does it make a case for why we should be paying the much we are paying for? And when you look at the whole structure of pricing of fuel, what needs to change in a realizable manner to ensure that Kenyans are cushioned from all this?
Okay. And it's very hard to follow Erastus. You know, he's an oratory voice to follow whatever he said afterwards. But I think the problem that we have is short-termism. And what do I mean by short-termism? If you look at price control is only supposed to be a short-term measure as you put in long-term measures to sort out a key area, in this case, fuel prices. We should not be in a situation where EPRA continuously is setting the price, because that's price control, literally. That's distorting the market and everything and saying, we will sell it, you should sell it at this price, regardless of whatever you might think, you should sell it at this price. And it is not sustainable. As you saw, they tried to maintain the price the last 2 months. Unfortunately, the government is broke, so it was not a sustainable way of cushioning Kenyans on the increase of prices. Earlier, I think 2-3 months ago, not 3 months ago, around April, May, I did a piece on that fuel prices are going to continue going up. We've not even seen the worst of it. Because how the fuel process operates is that you don't buy this month for this month's fuel. Yeah, an oil marketer gets an order to supply fuel for October. That order was already given in 3 months ago. Yeah, and they've already secured it, paid. It will land in October. So if you look at the way prices for fuel have gone up since December, up to around June, July, you realize that even the last 2 months when they're questioning, fuel prices are actually supposed to have gone up. Generally because global prices were going up. Yeah. So why do I say short-termism? If we had a long-term plan on energy, especially petroleum products, by right now we should be having enough capacity to store petrol. Right now we don't have capacity to store. We import, distribute, wait for the next one, distribute. If there's a delay in shipment, there's a delay in fuel in the economy. So short-termism. And what storage will have done, since the government that is in power is Jubilee, in 8 years they could have built storage capacity. What storage will have done in 2020 when fuel prices drastically dropped to close to $10 per barrel is a time you buy and you stock up. Yeah? When fuel prices start going up, you're not controlling prices, you are releasing cheaper fuel, yeah, to make sure that your country is running on cheaper fuel. If there's a delay shortage or anything, or global shortage, you have your own stock of fuel. Another thing that we need to do in terms of long term, apart from just storage, if they really want to manage the prices of fuel and not leave it to market forces, there's National Oil Company, yeah, which they had started, which has petrol stations, and it died. You see, if you have National Oil operating at the same level as Shell in terms of distribution and service, and you sell the fuel, right now it's at 134, and they sell the fuel at 124. Yeah? If engineer or daktari want to be rich and go fuel at Shell at 134, some of us will go to National Oil and fuel at 124. It will force the guys who are at 134 to bring down the prices. So price control will never work. Price control has serious consequences. And also in this case, yes, they're justified when they say the shilling has dropped, because in the last 2 months, shilling moved from 105, 106 to 109. Yeah? And we still feel like the shilling is going to devalue further. IMF has an agenda to make sure that central bank stops controlling the shilling. If that happens, inevitably anything that you import is going to go up in terms of prices, including fuel. And unfortunately, it has ripple effects, because once fuel prices go up, transport costs go up, matatu fares go up, manufacturing costs go up, cost of goods go up. Kenya Power will be quick to say fuel surcharge, they will increase that fuel thing that is in your electricity bill and all that stuff, and inflation will just pick up and people suffer more.
Right, and Engineer Mushemi, I mean, with over 30 years of experience, I'm sure you've witnessed a lot of shifts in the pricing of all these products. And what do they tell you from your own assessment and watching the country where it has come, the question of cost of living rising on a daily basis? Is it the right direction for a growing economy, or are there things that can be done differently in your view?
Thank you, Sam. In terms of fuel, I think we are moving in the wrong direction, unfortunately. The tax regime for fuel products, I think, is a very, very unreasonable. I think the government has always used fuel as a cash cow because it is a mass-consumed product. It's something me and you must have, otherwise we stall. My colleague has talked about kerosene. You're talking about petrol, diesel. It's a must-have product. So it's very easy for the government to say increase the price in this because that is money in a bank for them. But I think, Sam, what we must appreciate is the very unreasonable tax regime for the fuel. Because how do you explain that fuel landed in Mombasa, traveled across our country to Uganda, is trading at a cheaper price in Uganda than in Nairobi? It doesn't make sense. And of course, as Kenyans, we are concerned that even these taxes that are being levied left, right, and center by our government are not being used prudently. I think that's a real fear. Of course, down, as my colleague has said, the bigger impact would be felt now. The ongoing infrastructure projects are obviously going to cost much, much more. Whether they're going to be completed now before the Jubilee regime exits the scene is a different story. Because fuel is a major component in infrastructure projects. And those projects, the expressways, the Keno Sagana, Jualing, Mau Mau roads, etc., are going to go up significantly. So we haven't seen...
So that means the cost will have to be revised and... It
will have to be reviewed because there's something we call a variation of prices. And if fuel being a major component in infrastructure projects, invariably, those projects will go up.
Right.
There's no doubt about it. I'm in the industry, and I know that for a fact because it's a major input.
Okay.
In the construction industry. So that will go up. And of course, to say nothing of the other multiplier effects that have been mentioned, material fares will go up. The cost of food because of the transport of food products from our food basket areas will go up, which means now the Kenyan must brace himself for a very hard time, Sam.
And Dr. Were, there's this notion that those that are in employment or formal employment may not necessarily feel the pain at the pump. They're sort of cushioned, they have a buffer. Is that the reality for doctors?
I don't think so. Well, we, as doctors, you have to move, and other healthcare professionals, you have to move to go to our workplaces. And of course, when the price at the pump goes up, then it affects all other products in the market that you have to consume. So just the same way the common wananchi feels a pinch, then as professionals also, then we get affected. And we have to look at this in the space where we have had a very devastating impact of COVID in terms of employment. So many people are unemployed. The socioeconomic impact has been very big to most of the population in this country. So raising the fuel at this particular moment, you're adding more stresses. And no wonder, if you look around, we're having more and more issues of mental issues, because you're adding stresses, you're making life very difficult for both the people who are in formal employment and informal employment. And this, I don't think, is the right direction to take as a country. Right.
And Reginald, of course, the two of you refer to the cost of living, how it will be affected. There is no doubt, because starting the 1st of July, the government introduced the 16% VAT on LPG, meaning that now the cooking gas is more expensive. I mean, and unless you adjust and cook less or look for other alternative means, maybe that may also not be clean fuel, it becomes difficult. But when you are to reflect on where the country is going, the economy is going, 2020, the economy contracted by 0.3%. And you want to reopen the economy gradually but consistently. What does this do, this cost of fuel and the rising cost of living, do to the entrepreneurial spirit that Kenyans may want to exhibit, especially in areas that require a lot of production? If
you look at fuel on the elements of its impact on inflation, which is pretty much cost push inflation. That's inflation because prices are rising, not because demand has risen. And the problem of cost push inflation, central bank has no control over cost push. Central bank can control money supply and they can control demand pull inflation, but cannot control cost push inflation. To put it into a picture of what that does to an economy, COVID aside and all, if you look in the last 5 to 6 years, inflation has been averaging between 5 and 8%. That means 8% of your purchasing power is being eroded annually if you just take it on an average. But then if you also look at the latest Kenya National Bureau of Statistics economic survey that came out last week and 9 months late, average wage grew by 3.6% last year. So it means, in essence, what your salary could do for you last year, even with the increment that you got, you can only purchase 5% less. Yeah, so if you could buy things worth 100 shillings last year, today you can only buy things worth 95 or 90. What does that do? Your salary is static, cost of living is going up. You still have to live, as you said. You still have to cook, so you're going to buy that gas. Dr. Were still needs to go to Kenyatta and do his surgery, so he still needs to fuel his car. But even if he goes to an Uber, the Uber guy is also going to increase his rates because fuel has gone up. So you find energy costs start consuming a larger portion of your disposable income. Yeah. So as it consumes more of your disposable income, that means what you are saving starts reducing. And that is the quandrum that Kenya finds itself in from days past up to now, is that our saving rate keeps on reducing year after year after year. And as your saving rate is reducing as a country, that means you do not have capital for future investment and future growth. If you don't have capital for future investment and future growth, you are not going to grow. Yeah? And if you want to grow, you'll be forced to borrow to be able to grow. So if you then look at a national level now, because of that lack of savings, that lack of growth in savings from individuals, from corporates and all, the government has been running deficits and financing those deficits from borrowing. Now to the extent where you realize that in our budget deficit, for every 100 shillings collected by KRA, close to 60 cents goes to pay debt. 30 cents goes to pay salaries. You're only left with 10 cents. I will not talk about corruption or where that 10 cents goes. So we are in a vicious cycle where, truth be said, if you look into the future, it is very hard to be very optimistic unless we sort out the element of how do we increase people's disposable income for them to be able to create savings, which creates capital that can be now used for investment for us to have real growth. In the economy. You realize the economic growth for last year that contracted by 0.3% was saved by construction, which miraculously grew by 11.4%. Why? Because the government... I'll explain that later. But you see, the government sees and says, we need the economy to grow. What do? Yeah? Call engineer Mshemi, tell him, go build an expressway. Yeah? So your whole construction, growth of 11.2%, is roads and construction, not real value addition that is actually being generated. So if you remove what was spent on the expressway last year, our economy shrank by way more than 0.3%. So if you realize during, sorry again to say, Jubilee's regime, economic growth has been supported by government expenditure in infrastructure and not real output growth in the private sector.
Very interesting. And I want us to take a look at some statistics from the economic survey of 2021. Just a bit of them because it is a wide document on several matters covered there. Do you have that? Right, of course, as we wait for that, it is the report that indicates that the economy contracted by 0.3%, and the international arrivals. This is the reason why, some of the reasons why there was that effect. In 2019, international arrivals were 2.03 million persons, and in 2020 that dropped to 579,000, majorly because of COVID-19 restrictions. And then, of course, in terms of the bed capacity, in 2019, 2019, 9 million beds were occupied. This is mainly in the hospitality industry, but in 2020, only 3.8 million beds were occupied. So that's a hit on the tourism and hospitality industry. Then the available beds as of 2019 were 26.8 million, and in 2020, 21.3 million. So compare that versus 3 million occupied. The trade volumes, 9% decline in imports. That is the goods that you are getting from outside, majorly because of the restrictions that came with COVID. And then the exports grew by 7.9%, of course, according to the economic survey. Horticulture, that is some of the top exports of 2020 were in the horticulture industry, tea, apparel and clothing, and coffee. And horticulture appears to have grown and surpassed the levels of tea, leading to the increased exports. Then the industrial machinery, these are the main imports: industrial machinery, petroleum products, like you're talking about, iron and steel, majorly for construction, fats and oils. Those are some of the things that are key in the top imports, and we'll be continuing with more on the side, of course, including what has happened to the agriculture sector, livestock sector. And Engineer Mushemi, when you reflect on this, and he raises an important point that the construction industry appears to have been driven by government projects. I don't know whether you agree with that notion, but when a Kenyan sits at home and complains about their situation, but you have a government that is saying, no, the economy has grown. Look at the GDP, almost doubled, I guess, ever since 2013. The infrastructural projects got into the level there are, more thousands of kilometers built, a standard gauge railway. But the Kenyan at home does not feel this. Why are we getting it wrong?
I think when it comes to infrastructure, there has been significant infrastructure developments in this country, truth be told, and this reflected in the increased consumption of things like cement, steel, etc., etc. But we have to appreciate some that infrastructure is a long-term process. The benefits will be felt time to come. Mm-hmm. It is not a short-term return. I mean, when the former president put up a Thika superhighway, the benefits were not seen during his regime. I mean, the major developments you see along the Thika superhighway and those economic returns, etc., etc., they are now being felt many, many years later. And that's likely to happen in the superhighways, the during of Keno, Sagana, Nairobi, Mau Summit, etc., etc. So they're likely to be pain in the short term, but these gains will be felt much later. Okay. Of course, politically, that is not very, very pleasant for the politicians, because politicians focus mainly on short-term gains. Mm-hmm. So when the government focuses on infrastructure, there is growth, which appears now in economic survey. But in terms of the common man, is actually pain, because it is money coming out for a long-term investment, but the gains will be felt much later going forward. And
so how do you resolve that? Because, I mean, the next president will have to come and do more projects because they want to outwit each other in the succession. So shall we continue feeling all this pain as we wait for the gains? As we wait for the gains, they come, yes, but there's more pain accumulating?
If the readers were to ask me, and I'm sure they will not ask me, Sam, I'm sure they would go slow on the infrastructure developments at some point, at least complete what there is. But, unfortunately, some of these projects have been developed by using borrowed funds, which is rather unfortunate, because what he was saying is that part of the money we are generating is not going to repay that debt. The question is, when do we generate enough revenue, one, to pay debts, and then realize returns on those infrastructure projects? And the costs are likely to go up rather than down, particularly when you increase diesel and petrol. So there likely to be more pain. Okay. But if they were to ask me, as I said, they would actually slow down on the infrastructure projects.
Okay. All right. And FCPA, Omolo, I remember in June this year, you spoke quite passionately about the cost of corruption when it comes to influencing government policies. And as you look at it right now, if you ask any Kenyan, ordinary Kenyan out there, they'll tell you that the government does not matter to them. It doesn't care about them. The political class does not care about them. what is the responsibility of corruption in forcing matters to where we are at the moment? And from an auditor's perspective, what do you think we need to do right so that in the next regime, post-Jubilee, but also in the current, that in the next regime, people can actually start to account for the resources and action taken against those that don't?
Thank you. It's a heart-wrenching question that you have raised. And I want to say a few things. One is corruption needs to be stigmatized, not weaponized, as I've had people, talk around recklessly on the streets, but it needs to be stigmatized. Now, the greatness of a nation is in its way and a demonstration of doing simple things. And also, it must have a way of gaining public confidence that it is actually doing the right thing. And one of the many things that, of course, our government has not done is to publicize some of the great things they have done. Infrastructure, of course, is just one of them, even if the benefits come later and things like that. But going back, one of the simplest ways, for example, of gaining public confidence, would be publish in the newspapers and through great TV stations like The Citizen, the progress of corruption cases. Do it every month. It won't cost much, but by the way, it will make people feel so good that, hey, this thing is going on. But people would not like to hear files disappearing. People would not like to hear that the case ended, yes, there was a negotiation behind the curtain somewhere. And I'm not saying negotiation is bad, but publish it so that people know that corruption is being dealt with openly and in a way that can help people to have confidence in the government. The other one, is that the 30% of our budget which goes into corruption, and this is public knowledge, that door must be made small. I know there will always be something, slipping here and there, but you need to make that window and that avenue smaller. Why and how? Why? Because we need the money to be doing other things. Beyond infrastructure, you need the money now to go into productive resources, as our economist will tell us. Number two, you need that money to attend to key areas of the economy, like food production. You need the area of health to be attended to. You don't need another pandemic to realize that, in fact, people need to be protected from certain diseases in order to be able to respond well to CV-19. And I can go on and on, but those are some of the key things I would like to put on the floor. Deal with corruption. You have great avenues of revenue collection, and we just had Kenya Revenue Authority do a marvelous thing, collecting so much money and beyond what they had planned to collect. In times of crisis, in times when people have lost jobs, and also in a time when there was less money in circulation, but they still did it. What is the miracle with the Commissioner General in Kenya Revenue Authority? There is something he does right, which other people are not doing, and one wishes you had other civil servants at the same level.
Right, there's a funny question, but we'll get back to that.
Yeah.
The role of auditors in helping us through this, but we'll talk about that later on. But Dr. Were, so you look at this, and of course, once upon a time, if you got that prestigious career, you are assured of safety in your career, a good life. I don't know whether it's the same anymore. A while back we hosted a doctor here who was telling us that it is also still difficult for a doctor. You graduate from the med school and then you have to, of course, go through the motions, rise through the ranks, against a bit of experience, become probably a specialist if you want to get into that. What is the place of professional career in an economy like Kenya with all the challenges that we face? And how do you even inspire those in school to pursue it for their passion, but also as a source of livelihood, as a livelihood that will really keep them comfortable?
Yeah, thank you, Sam. I think we need to go back and reflect, because I think as a nation we've lost our soul. If you look at the government that we have now, and even the previous government, if I echo the sentiments from the other guests, it seems like the government keeps on working for itself, and it has forgotten the people who actually put them there to try to put systems in place so that they can be able to have a better life in this country. So I think the problem that we have is the issue of our systems. Our governance systems, we need to look at it and make it work. We need to remember, as politicians, as the political class, as the government, you are put there by the people so that you can be able to govern. It's a delegated authority. But the way we are running things, the way we are seeing professionals being treated in this country, the way we are seeing taxes being raised and from each and every corner, it seems that the government is only interested about the volume of the shilling it makes and not about the survival of the common mwananchi. The issue of professionals and if life is really worth. In fact, I was having a discussion with some of the youth and I was telling them you rather go to a TVET institution right now rather than going to a university, because if in this country alone we have more than 2,000 doctors who are unemployed, each and every time you see after KCP, KCSE results, the kids saying, oh, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a neurosurgeon. We look at them and say, you want to be a neurosurgeon, but this country does not value you as a professional. If you look at the landscape right now, the government is systematically trying to exclude the professional from the governance. If you look at the health system, that's what is happening. You see laws have now been made to ensure that the voice of these professionals is not being heard. And these are the technocrats. These are the people who will guide you and come up with economic blueprints. We have been issuing guidance in terms of COVID, how to handle it. But when it comes to now issues like how do we go about handling health issues, you find the politicians and the business interest take the day. So I think we are facing a very bleak future as a youth in this country, because you find we are trying to reform our education sector to have professionals being churned out, but you're not preparing for their future. So these are graduates. But I think yesterday we saw a story where we're having graduates who are now hawking things in the streets in Kenya. Well, we still have use for these graduates in terms of economic development. So I think as the youth and as professionals in this country, we're really dismayed in the manner in which the political class and business interests are carrying the day vis-a-vis the interests of the professionals and development of this country. And if you look at most countries without the professionals, look at the Industrial Revolution, look at Europe, they didn't develop without their professionals. Look at these vaccines now.
Doctor, I find that interesting because we live in a country where every young person would want to, yes, they have their daily job, probably 8 to 5 or whatever the schedule is, but to have something running on the side. Is it the desirable situation, and how rampant is it among your colleague doctors?
If I'm given a choice and given a proper work environment, I'd rather work in one institution and provide the best service I can to the public. But sometimes you find that, and you're seeing most professionals agitating for simple things like salary increase. When you see a doctor in the street, then you as a common mwananchi should be very worried, because if this is the person who's telling you he's not able to meet his needs despite putting all the efforts in terms of developing himself, what about you who's in the informal sector? So these are things that I think as we elect the next government, we really need to have honest conversations with our politicians to be. And we really need to elect people who are going to make a difference. Because the issue of corruption, the issue of the governance challenges we have been facing, we've been speaking about it year in, year in. After every election cycle, we are still just repeating the same kind of conversation. So where do we put the stop and now start talking about the welfare of all citizens of this country? Yeah.
And we'll continue with that question with Engineer Mushemi here in FCPA Omolo, because, I mean, with over 30 years of experience, your experience is equivalent to the age of the young people that are now struggling with what else to do. So you'll be telling us about nurturing careers and also what the young people can do through this election of 2022 and politics. We're taking a short break here. Of course, the rest of the panelists will also be here. We're taking a short break here, and we'll come back and talk about the road to 2022, the politics, the aspirations of a nation, and what you must know as a Kenyan, a citizen, a voter, or even whether you don't vote, as a Kenyan. Stay tuned.